Colette Aram, 1983, Keyworth. Why did one short walk end in murder? Every quiet place has a story people would rather not remember. Not because the place was dangerous or because the warning signs were obvious, but because everything began in a way that felt painfully normal. A teenage girl left home on a Sunday evening. Her boyfriend was expecting her. Her family knew where she was going. The route was familiar, the distance was short, and nothing about the moment suggested a murder investigation was about to begin. On the evening of October 30th, 1983, 16-year-old Colette Aram walked out of her family home in Keyworth, Nottinghamshire. She was going to see her boyfriend, Russell. Normally, Russell would have picked her up by car, but that evening his car was off the road, so Colette decided to walk. It was a choice that should have meant nothing, a simple change in routine. But within minutes, that small change would place her in the path of a man who had already been searching for a victim. Keyworth was a village south of Nottingham, surrounded by country roads, fields, and close-knit residential streets. Colette lived on Normanton Lane with her parents, Jackie and Tony, and her brother, Mark. Her mother was a hairdresser, her father was a joiner, and Colette had recently left school to train as a hairdresser herself. She was at the age where life was just beginning to open up. Work, friends, love, independence, the kind of life that still had every direction available. That Sunday had not begun with alarm. Colette had spent part of the afternoon baking cakes. Later, she planned to visit Russell. He lived in the village, and the walk was often described as around a mile to a mile and a half, taking roughly 20 minutes. There was no reason for her family to believe she was in danger. This was not a long journey through unfamiliar territory. It was a familiar route through the community where she lived. Around 8 in the evening, Colette left home. Soon after, she was seen near Nicker Hill. Witnesses later reported hearing a woman scream at about 8:10, followed by the sound of a car driving away at speed. At the time, those sounds were fragments without meaning. A scream in the night could be misunderstood. A car speeding away could be unrelated. But when Colette did not arrive at Russell's house, those details would begin to take on a far darker shape. What no one in Colette's family knew was that earlier that same day, Paul Stewart Hutchinson had already been moving through the area. According to court evidence, he had hidden in a shed near a riding school in Lady Bay and watched young girls. He stole a red Ford Fiesta and later drove toward Keyworth. Prosecutors said he approached other schoolgirls before he encountered Colette. By the time Colette was walking to Russell's house, Hutchinson was not simply passing through. The evidence suggests he was actively looking for someone to attack. When Colette did not arrive, the first reaction was confusion. Russell and Colette's parents began calling each other, trying to understand where she could be. At first, there were possible explanations. Maybe she had stopped to speak to friends. Maybe she had taken longer than expected. Maybe she had changed her mind and gone somewhere nearby. But as more time passed, those ordinary explanations began to collapse. By around 10:30 that night, police were contacted. Family, friends, and neighbors searched for Colette. The road she should have taken was checked. People tried to trace her steps through the village, but there was no sign of her. Somewhere between home and Russell's house, she had vanished, and while her family searched the streets, the man responsible had already left behind evidence that would wait silently for decades. After abducting Colette, Hutchinson forced her into the stolen red Ford Fiesta. Prosecutors later said he beat her with a bottle, raped her, and strangled her with his hands. He then left her body in a field near Keyworth. The brutality of the crime stood in stark contrast to the ordinariness of the evening. Colette had not been involved in anything dangerous. She had not disappeared after a secret meeting or a risky journey. She had simply crossed paths with a predator. The next morning, on October 31st, Colette's body was found at around 9 in the morning in a field roughly a mile and a half from where she had been abducted. Her brother, Mark, later saw the scene where police had gathered, a moment investigators said would remain with him for life. For her mother, Jackie, the realization came before anyone needed to say the words. Years later, she recalled seeing family members return and shake their heads. In that instant, she knew her daughter was dead. The murder devastated Keyworth. Police launched a major investigation, and hundreds of officers worked the case. They followed leads connected to the stolen Ford Fiesta, the location of the body, and reports of a man seen in the area. One clue led them to the Generous Britain pub in Cossack. After the murder, a man had gone there with blood on his hand. He ordered food and drink, used the bathroom, and left behind a paper towel. Forensic material was recovered, but in 1983, DNA technology had not yet reached the point where it could identify him. Then the case took a disturbing turn. Several weeks after the murder, police received a letter believed to be from the killer. The writer taunted investigators and claimed he had worn a Halloween mask. He suggested that nobody knew what he looked like and told police they would never catch him. The letter was not only evidence, it was a display of arrogance. The killer appeared to believe he had outsmarted everyone. In June of 1984, Colette's murder became the first case featured on the BBC program Crimewatch. The reconstruction brought national attention. Viewers called in with information, and police received hundreds of tips. Many suspects were checked and eliminated. Over time, investigators ruled out around 1,500 possible suspects, but the man who killed Colette remained free. For the Aram family, the lack of an arrest meant grief without resolution. Every anniversary reopened the wound. Every public appeal carried the same hope and the same risk. Hope that someone might finally speak, and pain from having to relive the worst night of their lives. Jackie later returned from Greece to support renewed appeals. She said she had to do it for Colette, so she could say she had done everything possible to bring the killer to justice. While Colette's family lived with those unanswered questions, Paul Hutchinson built a life that appeared ordinary from the outside. He was twice married and had 4 children. He worked as an electrician, later as a youth worker, and eventually ran a newspaper delivery business. After the murder, he had reportedly told his own family he had cancer, shaved his head as though he were undergoing treatment, and disappeared for a time under that excuse. Then he returned to daily life. That contrast remains one of the most chilling parts of the case. Hutchinson was not immediately exposed as a monster. He lived among neighbors, worked jobs, raised children, and carried on while the family of the girl he killed waited for answers. He had once told police they would never catch him. For more than 22 years, it looked as if he might be right. But evidence can survive longer than lies. In the years after Colette's murder, forensic science changed dramatically. The case was never truly closed, and in 2004, renewed attention came after Crimewatch revisited the investigation for its 20th anniversary. Detectives began actively pursuing old evidence again. Items collected in 1983 were re-examined with modern techniques. This included material from the stolen car, the letter, Colette's clothing, and the paper towel from the Generous Britain. In 2008, investigators finally developed a DNA profile of the killer. It was the breakthrough they had waited for. But there was a problem. The profile did not match anyone already on the national database. Police had the killer's biological signature, but still no name. So they turned to familial DNA searching, a method that looks for close biological relatives rather than only exact matches. The break came after a young man was arrested over a motoring matter. His DNA was taken routinely, and when compared to the profile from Colette's case, it appeared as a near match. But he was too young to commit the crime. He had not been born when Colette was murdered. That meant the killer was likely a close male relative. Investigators then focused on his family, and the trail led to his father, Paul Stewart Hutchinson. In April of 2009, Hutchinson was arrested and charged with Colette's murder. At first, he denied responsibility. He tried to blame his deceased brother, but detectives had already found a DNA sample connected to that brother and ruled him out. Hutchinson's DNA matched the profile from the case. The letter, the pub evidence, the stolen car, and the old forensic material had finally converged on one man. On December 21, 2009, Paul Hutchinson pleaded guilty to murdering Colette Aram. The rape charge remained on file. On January 25, 2010, he was sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. For the first time in more than 26 years, the Aram family had a conviction. But justice did not bring every answer. Hutchinson did not explain why he targeted Colette. He did not give the family the full account they had waited for since 1983. He had taken her life, hidden behind ordinary routines, and allowed her family to suffer through decades of uncertainty. Then, less than a year after being sentenced, the possibility of hearing more from him ended. On October 10, 2010, Hutchinson was found unconscious in his cell at Nottingham Prison. Emergency services were called, and attempts were made to resuscitate him. He died on the way to the hospital. Reports suggested a possible medication overdose, though the post-mortem findings were inconclusive. With his death, any remaining answers died with him. Today, the murder of Colette Aram stands as a solved case with unresolved shadows. We know who killed her. We know how he was caught. We know that preserved evidence and modern DNA science finally broke through a case that had haunted Keyworth for decades. But the question of motive remains incomplete. Why Colette? Why that route? Why that night? What remains beyond the forensic breakthrough is the life at the center of the case. Colette was not just the subject of a famous cold case. She was a daughter, a sister, a girlfriend, and a 16-year-old girl training for a future she never got to live. Her final journey began with an ordinary decision made in a place where she should have been safe. A short walk through her own village became the last confirmed movement of her life. The man who killed her once believed time would protect him. He believed disguise, silence, and distance could bury the truth. For many years, it seemed that way. But the evidence he left behind waited until science could read it. And when it finally did, the words from his own letter were proven wrong. They did catch him. Colette never reached Russell's house that night. Her family never recovered the years stolen from them. But her case became part of British criminal history, not because of the killer's arrogance, but because of the persistence of those who refused to let her be forgotten. A village remembered, a family kept fighting, and after more than 26 years, the truth finally had a name.